morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Roku and Pod TV's World Edition. And on this show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, a turbulent economy, divisive politics, and of course, we would be remiss if we did not talk about the midterm election results and the ongoing fight for the United States Congress and Senate. We're also going to talk about other things in the world, but I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in the Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, the 8th largest state in the union. Well, I want to begin today, before I just share some insight with you and bring in our panel, we are reaching out to some politicians who recently won, including Wiley Nickel, the congressman-elect, has won a very surprising race in the 13th Congressional. And we're going to maybe bring him back on along with Brad Crump. But first, let's get right to it. Control of Congress is still up in the air. In the Senate, it's going to come down to 4 races: Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Georgia. But Democrats flipped surprisingly a seat in Pennsylvania, making it harder for Republicans to take the majority with John Fetterman's surprising win. In the House, Republicans are expected to win 5 seats they need to take control, but many states are still being counted and looked at. They had key wins in Florida and in the battleground district of Virginia. We'll be tracking the results as they come in over the next day or two to know where the United States Congress will be, whether Kevin McCarthy could be the next speaker, and whether there will be a leadership in the Senate or return to McConnell. So Republicans picked up fewer seats than we thought. It wasn't as big of a red wave. And in abortion rights, Michigan voters added the right for an abortion to their constitution. And a pair of red states, Kentucky and Montana, appeared to turn aside anti-abortion measures. And voters chose the first female governors in Arkansas, Massachusetts, and New York, and served the first member of the Gen Z to the Congress. There's a storm coming, and we're going to talk about that. Facebook is laying off thousands of workers, the parent company Meta, and Brittany Griner is being moved to a penal colony in Russia. But here's my final take. It was Bill Clinton in 1992 that said, "It was the economy, stupid." Well, here we are in the year 2022, the day after the midterm elections. And I think that we must say that former President Clinton's statement then perhaps rings true and is a lesson to Democrats. I want to thank Shaquille Latimer for bringing this point up, but I think Shaquille was dead on. Inflation is at a 40-year high, hovering in at 8.2%. Gas prices have continued to rise. We're on the verge of a global recession. And despite attempts to make this race about Dobbs versus the Dobbs case on abortion, or democracy on the attack, it's clear that when it comes to voting, it's the kitchen table and what we pay at the pump and what we're paying for interest rates that really, really affect these elections. With President Biden's approval rating low and his inability to convey a convincing economic message, this has put the Democrats in an even more defensive position than they were in a year ago. And here we are. And if you think it's over, folks, the games have just begun. 2024 is just around the corner. Let's take a look at North Carolina. Without Donald Trump at the top of the ticket and no presidential race, Ted Budd beat Sherry Beasley. The Republicans won 2 seats on the Supreme Court and every Court of Appeal seat. And the North Carolina House was only 1 vote away from a supermajority, and the Senate now has a supermajority. With this in control, North Carolina legislatures intend to most likely change the maps, and the courts cannot do anything but approve them. And so things are going to get even worse in North Carolina, a battleground state. Fast forward to next year. Joe Biden has not decided whether he's formally going to announce for the presidency, but I'm assuming it is a Trump and Biden rematch. Well, it's going to get very interesting. So I say let the games begin. But Democrats, I think it's fair to say that if you don't start developing a new set of plays, you may be in serious trouble in less than a year. Let's bring in our panel. Shaquille Latimer, Lee Newton Rhodes, and Mark Lee. Surprisingly sobering.
I'd like to address just a couple of things in your open. So North Carolina, look, I don't think that the Republicans are going to just change the districts in such a way that they're guaranteed wins forever. I think that's a step too far. I don't think that's the case. But let's just actually address what happened last night. If we go back a few months ago, I said that if the Republicans don't take the House by at least 250, 260 seats, this is a bad result. Republicans watching CNN and NBC, MSNBC, ABC today, they're pretty jubilant about the results, as they should be. Fox is saying, well, look, it's a good thing because at least we take one of the houses, and we may well take the Senate. So we can slow Biden down. Republicans have absolutely no reason whatsoever to celebrate today. This was an appalling result, and it really, I think, should be a point of reflection for Republicans and for Democrats, but for Republicans. So in the last election, when it looked like we were on air and it looked like Trump was going to win, I said that this should be a point of reflection for the Democrats, that perhaps they haven't actually gone out and addressed the issues as well as they should have. I think this time round, the polls were showing that people cared a lot about the two major things, inflation in the economy and crime. Those were the two things that people were talking about.
Yeah.
Most media outlets, including left-leaning media outlets and Democrats, were expecting this to be at least a red wave. Some people said a red tsunami, and other people said it'd be so red it'd look like a slaughterhouse. Right, that's what they were saying. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
A red trickle, would be an overstatement with what we saw.
Maybe that's a positive. Maybe that's a positive thing. Maybe.
I'm not going to get into whether it's positive or negative, as I know you guys think that I'm a right winger. I'm not. I'm not going to go into whether it's positive or negative. But what I'll say is this: I think that the Democrats, if they rest in their laurels and say, "Look, we had this great victory, so therefore we should thunder on with the policies the way they are," I think that they are doing themselves and the American people a disservice. Right. On the other hand, I think the Republicans are going to have to assess why they didn't get the voting turnout that they got. Now, I'm not buying the talking points that the Republicans are actually throwing at us at the moment. So what they're saying are things like, well, like in Pennsylvania, well, there was early voting a month before the debate. Now, I actually said that myself on last night's show. I did say that myself, that could be an issue. But the reality is that after accounting for those early votes, what you saw was Fetterman had a lead. Then Dr. Oz knocked that lead down a little bit. Then Fetterman had a lead again. Then Oz knocked that down a bit. And then there was a massive surge towards Fetterman, which was not something that I was picking. I predicted that wrong, as usual, because most of my political predictions are wrong. But yeah, I picked that wrong. So Fetterman won that fair and square. Fetterman won that in Pennsylvania, and he flipped a Republican seat. Now people can say, "Oh, it's because Oz is from New Jersey," or all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, Fetterman has won that. That is the decision of the people who voted in Pennsylvania. That's how it needs to be. Now let's cross to Georgia. Very interesting. Fox actually interviewed somebody who said, "I voted for Kemp, but I didn't bother voting at all in the Senate." Mm-hmm. So that's going to be interesting. It looks like that'll go to a runoff. Yeah. So we may not know until December the 6th or 7th exactly what the balance of power is going to be in the Senate. But what it's showing is that there isn't enough people who are prepared to say, "I'm really unhappy with the way Democrats have run the place, and so therefore I'm going to vote Republican." That's not actually happening. Now, is that because of abortion? Is that because of voting rights? Or is that, as Jatovi said last night, is that because those things are real issues that are still at the front of people's minds but Republicans haven't actually outlined and expressed and explained a plan that's going to actually fix that. Is it just that they're saying, well, look, much of the criticism was in 2020 that the Democrats ran on, I'm not Trump. Are the Republicans running on, I'm not Biden? Is that what's happened here? The last thing I'll just very quickly say is a lot of people are talking about those tremendous results that we've seen in Florida. Absolutely. And I think the Republicans in Florida, Ron DeSantis and Rubio, should be really pleased with the results they had, especially with them picking up Miami. However, there is a difference between Florida and the rest of the country. So Republicans are sort of hailing the success of Ron DeSantis, but the whole country is not Florida. The whole country is not Ron DeSantis. And worst of all, in my opinion, is this claim from people in New York, Republicans in New York, that the reason why the results were why Hochul won was because all of the people that were disgusted with New York left and they went to Florida. And even Ron DeSantis is kind of running with that all the people that were sick of wokeness around the country went to Florida, and that's why the result was so good. Look, I'm not buying that. Obviously, look, I think Zeldin would have been a good governor, but obviously he didn't get up. They've hung on there. I think that other issues need to be addressed. I think Republicans are going to need to get back in touch with people. In Australia, in the last election here in Australia, we didn't just see the Labor Party win as we were expecting them to, but we also saw most of the Conservative Party in Australia, they're called the Liberals, most of their blue ribbon seats that have never voted against them, go to independents. That really shows that there's a disconnect around what people wanted. And a lot of that actually has to do with energy. A lot of people are after renewable energy, but they're not getting it. Now, what Biden has done is try to promote green energy solutions. Because I happen to know a little bit more about the subject, I don't agree with what he's doing. I agree with what he's trying to achieve, but I don't agree with how he's trying to get there. I think it's counterproductive. But I think that the centre-right parties around the world are going to have to address this issue and put up their ideas versus the other party's ideas, instead of just saying, well, this is terrible and what we should do is go back to oil and coal. Obviously, the world is not at that spot. So if the Republicans really want to win elections, that's what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to get back in touch with people, address some issues, and Democrats are going to have to not take it for granted that they've actually had a really good result last night. But in summary, I think that Democrats should be pretty happy with themselves. I think that Biden should be sighing a breath of relief at the moment. Even if the seats are still toss-ups all went to the Republicans, you would still have to conclude that the Democrats have done a marvelous job here and Republicans have failed badly. No matter what they say, they have failed really, really badly here.
Hey, Shaquille and Lee, I'd love to hear both of your thoughts about what I'm going to bring up. But in one of the speeches, because definitely he was a factor in a lot of the elections, Trump actually did something that, well, he is a brilliant politician, and I'll even acknowledge that I felt was very brilliant in what he did, because a lot of times people have been very critical. Even us here on this network have been critical of the media, but he actually threw out an olive branch to the media, because he actually gave them some praise and some support, and it definitely was like saying that he appreciated their work and what they were about. And I thought that was actually a very brilliant political move, particularly if he's going to possibly run for presidency again on the 15th, which some people have said that that's what that special announcement is going to be. But I'm just wondering your thoughts about the media bias and how maybe some of the candidates are recognizing that part of the media's job is to do reporting on what the candidates are saying and doing. And in my mind, when I read this, it definitely sounded like an olive branch was being extended. He was talking about the nature of people and how the people are, they were at this event where, for lack of a better term, and to borrow one of the other candidates' slogans, not more than, they weren't just billionaires and athletes. They were common folks that had a passion for what they were about. And in the course of that, he did extend that media olive branch as well. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that, and if that's something we're going to see more of, people recognizing, one, the power of the media, but also recognizing that they might need to get the media to understand that they need to be more objective and maybe even extend some olive branches from both sides, both the left and the right. But I was just wondering your thoughts. And when I read that, it caught me off guard, but kind of pleasantly.
I do have a response, but Lee, I'll perhaps you can go first, and then I'll respond.
I appreciate that. I think part of the problem is a lot of people put blinders on and just vote for the party. Lee Zeldin won New York State, except for New York City. And in fact, that he got Staten Island. So it was 4 boroughs. That's why he lost. People just blindly voting, their party, I think, for whatever reason. And one thing that I just want to share just showed up now on Fox News. In Pennsylvania, state representative won, despite being dead. Democratic Anthony Tony DeLuca died October 9th. He was 85, and he won an election. People, I think sometimes people just don't think. They vote their party. This goes on both sides. I'm not picking on just the Democrats. It goes on both sides. And they just put blinders on. Issues don't matter. Nothing else. Who's my guy? And
Well,
they'll
I'm
stick
gonna go
with
back-
them.
I think issues probably do matter. I think that some people are concluding
Not
that
as much as party, I don't think.
But I think it's going
I
back
think some
to
people are concluding that Republicans are going to do a better job of some issues, and other people are saying, well, I think the Democrats are going to do better for some issues without caring about the character of the candidate themselves. But let me just address Trump for the Trump issue just for a minute. Jacoby brought up a very good point last night when he said Dr. Oz may have actually been hurt by the fact that Donald Trump went into Pennsylvania and rallied there. Pennsylvania doesn't seem to like Donald Trump, and I think there was an overestimation of Pennsylvanians disliking Biden because of his energy policies and that sort of thing. So that could very well be the case, and you can actually see around the country that a lot of places where Donald Trump has gone, where he has gone and recommended candidates in Republican primaries, those candidates generally have won. But a lot of those candidates have struggled, and that could very well be a Trump issue. It could very well be that if Trump's around, all you're doing as Republicans are talking to the people that are already on his side, but you're not endearing yourself to the independents who are actually going to swing the election your way. And that's a pretty important point to take away. And I think that's going to be really interesting for the future of the Republican Party. If Trump runs in 2024, as I said multiple times last night, I think it's a really, really bad idea for Ron DeSantis to even challenge him in the primary or to be his running mate. I think that's an awful idea.
Yeah. Well,
I think that even if Ron DeSantis won, even if Ron DeSantis was to beat him in the primary, I think that the amount of negative publicity would hurt him so badly. So the question for the Republicans is, do you want to if Trump announces he's going to run, do you want to let him have a go in 2024 and win, lose, draw, or otherwise? What's the plan past that? What's the plan for 2028? Or do you want to actually get rid of Trump? But what's really clear is that Trump is becoming a more toxic effect on the electorate, including, and we can discount Democrats. We can discount all the people that dislike Trump, think he's a criminal, think he's a horrible person, whatever. Forget about them. Let's just talk about the people that would ordinarily vote for center-right parties or ordinarily vote for Republicans. They don't like him like that. That's a problem.
Well, let me throw my thing. Let's look, and Shaquille. If Sasha starts here, so Sasha, just give it a few minutes, and we'll get an update on Ukraine. But we're spending most of the show today, if you don't mind, talking about the elections. So maybe the last 10 minutes we'll let Sasha come in and just update on Ukraine in a few minutes. But Shaquille, very good points. I was thinking about that last night before I went to bed. At 1 a.m. Because I got back from Wiley's party. And we congratulate once again Congressman-elect Wiley Nickel, who is going to be our newest congressman in North Carolina. What a surprising victory over Bo Hines. Close, but a big win for the senator. Does Trump turn more votes out, by being on the ballot? If you look, for example, let me finish, please. He endorsed Ted
I
Biden.
haven't said anything.
Oh, sorry, I heard it noise in the back. He defeated Ted Budd. He endorsed Ted Budd, and that was huge. And Budd, the senator-elect, announced, thanked Trump formally, saying, I want to thank the president-elect Trump. So my thing is, if Trump wasn't even on the ballot, what would be better? Like, for example, if they're going after a state like North Carolina, would Trump, because he has the name recognition and has a U.S. senator, and also if they want to now take back the governorship, I would be very worried if I was Josh Stein, because now Mark Robinson, the presumptive nominee of the party, unless it's someone else, he's going to have the support of Trump, Bud, and Tillis, right? And in a presidential year. So anyway, that's the thing is, if they run DeSantis, is that actually not going to turn out as many votes? What? I mean, the question is, what scenario would turn out the most Republican votes? Because it's all about how many votes.
In my opinion, and again, it's not about Republican voters, right? Because Republican voters, by and large, are going to vote Republican. Democrat voters are going to vote for the Democrats. It's the other side of independence, right? They're going to decide things. I think that Ron DeSantis is probably a better candidate than Trump, because I think that he speaks to a wider group of people. He's younger. He's not as abrupt as Trump. But I don't think that any Republican is going to try to stop Trump from running. So again, there's that little bit of toxic, aura that Trump has. People have criticized, for example, Obama and the Clintons, but they can come out and they can rally the base to vote for certain candidates. Trump, on the other hand, can't seem to be able to do that. When Trump does it, he's only talking to people that already love Trump. The people that hate Trump, and they're not going to turn out. And the people that are indifferent are few and far between. Almost everybody has a negative or a positive view of Trump. Sasha, sorry, there's a bit of a lag on my screen. You go.
No problem. Shakil, what I would like to mention is that with all these horrible things that Biden and Democrats done in last 2 years, that should have normally lead to so-called a red wave or tide or something, that they would take 75% of the House and 65% of the Senate or so on, and that didn't happen. And the only reason, in my opinion, it didn't happen is Donald Trump. And I'll tell you that Biden has to be so happy about seeing that it wasn't a horrible wave that was swept all the Democrats out of. They would be swept nowhere. But of course, I agree with you that it will be a huge mistake for Trump to run. And hopefully, maybe if he has any brain left, maybe that yesterday's election will tell him something.
But his key endorsements won, though. So for his perspective, Ted Budd was endorsed by Trump, and he just defeated Beasley pretty handily. So
no, but it's not just one victory for Trump nominee. It's much more than that. Look, if you're taking normal, still normal, political parties in America, both Democrats and Republicans, normally how it works, okay, so they have parties, they have policies, they have think tanks, they have all consultants and everything, and to election, they nominate the most capable candidate who obviously promotes all the policies and all the things what this party is trying to achieve. And it always happened with both Democrats and Republicans until 2016. What's happened in 2016, or actually a year earlier, when primaries were, one man hijacked all party. He just completely owned the party, its finances, its membership, everything he's got under his control. And believe it or not, he still controls it today, because all the base, we are talking about roughly 70 million people. Whose base is that? DeSantis? No. It's or Nikki Haley? No. The base belongs to Donald Trump. It's his base. So he is in command of 70 million. Oh, it's a huge number. Trump controls completely finances of the party. All the money what was coming with all this nonsense that the election was hijacked, the election was stolen, that helped him tremendously to raise hundreds of millions of dollars, and he controls it all. So this is why, for obvious reasons, nobody can afford himself to run against Trump. So the only hope for Republicans is that Trump will announce that he is no longer going to run for the president of the United States of America. It will be a relief. Then there will be DeSantis and several other perhaps who will run. I don't know what's happened with the hundreds of millions of dollars what he's raised. He will keep it for himself, or he will return it somewhere. And if that's happened and Trump will support someone, let's see DeSantis. I'm not so sure about that, but let's imagine that he supports DeSantis. He will direct all his base of 70 million people to support DeSantis, because that's what says Trump.
Can I just say
Yeah.
Can I just say a couple of things there, Sasha?
Yeah.
So I don't think that Trump is in charge of or commands 70 million people. 70 million people may have voted for him in the last election, but that doesn't mean that they would vote for him again if the election was to be held again today. Right? People vote at the time because of the situation at the time. People change their minds. I don't think that 81 million people, the same 81 million people, are going to vote for Biden or for whoever Biden says. So I think that that's a bit of a misnomer. But let's just talk about another point you brought up, which was the claim by a lot of Republicans, and most especially Trump, that the election was stolen. When I look at the complaints objectively, it's not my country, so I don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. When I look at the objections, especially when it comes to what happened in Pennsylvania, I feel like I can understand what the complaint is. That is it ultimately it's a legal question about whether the judicial branch or the legislative branch has the right to determine how elections should be conducted. That to me seems like a reasonable challenge. And for people to say, well, they did these things, they shouldn't have done them, so therefore, we feel it was an unfair result. Yeah, I can understand that. They certainly shouldn't have had an event like January 6th, but I'm not prepared to say that Donald Trump was the cause of that in and of itself. I think that really just developed on its own steam. But leaving that aside for a moment, some Republicans have started talking about some election irregularities, we'll call them, and they're starting to talk about things that have gone on in Maricopa County in Arizona. In my opinion, knock it off, right? Knock it off. Because, yes, there were a couple of issues there, absolutely. There were some issues with the printers not printing things dark enough and that sort of stuff, but you need to knock it off.
And also, on
the same token, the Democrats that are going to do that, Democrats that have done that in the past, same thing, knock it off, right? Unless you have a challenge, and normally a challenge, like I've been saying, you should absolutely challenge election results because that's how you develop a better election system. Normally challenges come down to technical issues or legal issues. But the allegation, for example, that the Dominion counting systems that were used in 2020 were somehow rigged against Republicans. If that was true, and if that's ever going to be the claim in this particular election, I don't think that anybody would rig the election to be this close. Okay, I just don't see it happening. People say, well, look, the last election was decided ultimately by 40,000 or 70,000 votes across 3 states. Yeah, that may be true, but I think if you were going to bring something, you'd do a better job than that. So, yeah, I'm not buying it. There are, as I said, questions that I happen to think are reasonable to ask, but what happened in Maricopa County, just knock it off. If Curry Lake loses, if Masters loses, just accept the result. That is what it is. Go back to the drawing board, do some soul searching, work out what you're going to do next.
Yeah, and I think also, I want to thank Bo Hines for conceding defeat. So there was all these rumors that he was going to contest it, and he did the right thing, and he just said, congratulate Wiley Nickel. I hope he represents the community well, and maybe Hines will be back. There is pretty much a confirmation that they're going to redraw the maps in North Carolina, and now that they have control of the Supreme Court, those maps will be upheld most likely. So Bo Hines could be running again in a Republican leaning district. But I want to thank
you are talking about election. I know that that Wiley Nichols is a friend of yours. You are talking about something that was very tight, right? It was 7,000. He flipped the seat as well. 7,000 votes. Look, I'm sure that's going to happen. But I would say to you, and I know that you're obviously a North Carolinian, any criticism or any complaint that Republicans might draw maps in their favor in North Carolina, that'll be countered by places where the Democrats have got control and them drawing maps in their favor in other states.
Right.
I really don't think that's an issue. The question about who should make the decisions, the legislature or the courts, that's a question that is kind of pivotal. It's who does get to make that decision? Do the courts get to change election rules, and under what circumstances do they get to do that? And under what circumstances is whatever the legislator says, whether you think it's fair or not fair, what right do they have to continue to be able to say what they say? I think that given the constitution that you have and given states' rights, I think that it is up to the legislature ultimately, and it's up to the people in those states to complain to their legislature when they feel as though things have been unfair. But I'm not sure unless it's a constitutional issue, either state or federal constitution, I don't think it's up to the Supreme Court to say, well, we're just going to vacate rulings or overrule rulings of the legislature.
But that's only if the legislators speak up. Over the last few years, they just rolled over and went to sleep and told, the courts do whatever you want. And we're not going to stop you. It was just pathetic.
It's an interesting question, Lee. If the legislature is unhappy with a ruling from the Supreme Court, or if the legislature and the executive is unhappy with the ruling of the Supreme Court, to whom do they seek redress? If it's a state Supreme Court, obviously they can take it federally.
Right.
But if the legislature and the executive were both unhappy with the decision made by the Supreme Court, how do they seek redress of that? I mean, other than asking for a constitutional amendment in order to overcome what the Supreme Court has ruled, what do you do in that circumstance?
They just tell the Supreme Court, unless I'm wrong, you guys got it wrong, and rewrite the law.
Yeah, I mean,
but if the Supreme Court strikes down a law and says it's not constitutional, and the legislature and the executive believe it is, then what?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw in as an analyst, and this is gonna surprise you. I believe that it's best to just stay out of it legislatively and let the court be the final arbiter, because traditionally in the United States, the court has rendered their opinion, and then we honor that opinion. And if we get to the point where every decision that's rendered, when I know that Democrats don't like the Roe v. Wade decision or affirmative action decision, but in 2 years, there's a presidential election, and then a vacancy comes to the court, they'll have the chance to do that, right? So, Shaquille, I mean, I hope you agree with me, but I think if every time we're going to legislate against what the court renders, because we don't believe that's constitutional or unconstitutional, then I think it takes away the luster of the Supreme Court. Now, of course, the court, I think, we need to look at retirement ages. We need to look at that because I think they're in there for way too long. But that's but that's just my personal opinion. And surprisingly, wearing my political analyst hat, not my Democrat hat, I think that we need to have a high court that renders an opinion, and that becomes the law of the land.
But what if the legislature says to the court, that's not what we meant?
What?
For example, remember when Hillary Clinton had her emails and Jim Comey declined to prosecute her? Trey Gowdy said, on what part of the law are you relying on not prosecuting her? She broke all the elements of the law. And Jim Comey just made some elements, he refused to answer where Congress got it wrong.
So sorry. I'll just quickly say this, Steve. So Adam Lamparello was on last night, and he's somebody that I respect enormously. I know based on his comments to me and about me that he respects my mind as well. And I love the way that he thinks. Now, he happens to agree with you with term limits with the Supreme Court. I don't agree with that at all, mostly because I know that politicians generally, after they leave politics, will often get very, very high-powered jobs in private enterprise. The idea behind life appointments with the Supreme Court was that there was no incentive for them to go elsewhere. Having said that, they can actually resign if they really wanted to. And I don't think $500,000 a year to be immortal is a lot, but to be in that sort of position with the risks that entails, I don't think $500,000 a year is really enough for somebody with that sort of legal mind. But having said that, look, if you are going to impose term limits, I think you have to address that sort of an issue, because the danger would be that you only appoint people that are really old as opposed to younger people, of which you've had many younger people elected recently. But to your comment there, Lee, I don't want to play the devil's advocate because I totally disagree with the decision of the FBI and James Comey, where he said that that he's not going to prosecute Hillary Clinton.
He just made up some
The
intention.
argument probably could be that the director of the FBI has got some discretion. But I've said this before, especially with Gascon in LA. I don't think it's right for somebody sitting in the executive to decide, well, I'm not going to prosecute either this person or this type of crime. So in California, a lot of places they're saying, I'm not going to prosecute you if you've stolen less than $950 worth of goods. Well, that is the executive usurping the sovereignty of the legislature. If the legislature has sat down and allegedly debated issues, thought them through, and then have passed legislation, it's gone through the House of Reps, it's gone up to the Senate, it's passed, by what right does somebody in the executive have to say, well, that might be the law, but I'm just not going to enforce it?
Shaquille?
Yeah, you take an oath where you swear to uphold the Constitution. What right do you have to do that? I think that's completely wrong, and it should be stopped somehow.
James Comey added an element to the law. He said, we don't know that Hillary intended to break the law. But that's not an element. What person who breaks the law is going to say, well, I know I'm breaking the law? No one says that. We don't go into their brains. We don't go murderers, robbers, rapists.
Look, it was again, as I said, I think it was a terrible decision, and I've outlined the reasons why a moment ago. On the same token, I think that that had a significant impact on Hillary's campaign that James Comey announced, the FBI announced there was this issue with the emails in that last week or two of the election, as well as the allegations. I forget the guy's name, Dick something, short little wily kind of guy, who was involved in something. Some of those reports that came out quite late for Hillary Clinton, I think that was very damaging to her campaign. And personally, as I've said this before, if I was an American at that time, I think I would have voted for Hillary Clinton. In the last election, I don't think I would have voted for Biden. I think I would have voted for Donald Trump. And so going back to that time, I think that Hillary Clinton really did get the short end of the stick in a number of ways. She's been criticized with her handling of a whole heap of different things, Benghazi, other issues. But she's been in politics really since she was in college. She's been involved somehow in politics. It's very difficult to be involved in politics for that long without having done a few things that you're going to be criticized for. So I thought that was actually a bit unfair. But again, I've said what I said last night. Democrats spent this entire lead up to that election saying why you shouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton and you should vote for Bernie Sanders. And they went on this sort of attack mode with Hillary Clinton. And then as soon as Hillary Clinton took the nomination, then all of a sudden it was racist and sexist and homophobic not to vote for her. I think the message of the Democrats has been terrible. But what we need to do is start looking at what Republicans are going to offer for the future. What we need to do with the Democrats is make sure they don't rest on their laurels.
Well, I agree, and I think that and I think it's also before I want to get an update from Sasha Starr in Ukraine, and we'll be navigating these races. By the way, tomorrow I'll be greeting you live from PBS Carolinas as a return as a political analyst to give the post election. So this has been good practice for me. So I want to thank you all. And then Veterans Day is Friday, but I'll be at the town of Morrisville's Veterans Day event. So we're gonna probably have something about veterans on tomorrow, and then maybe on Monday we'll Mark Lee and I will try to bring in some veteran guests because it is a Veterans an Appreciation Month, and so we want to use that opportunity. But my final point is this: before we go to Sasha, I think a lot of times we look at these things saying it's Biden or Trump, but a successful president is only as good or as bad as the advisors and the team and the people they have around him. So my analogy would be, you could say, yeah, you got great quarterbacks like Mahomes or Tom Brady or Josh Kelly in the NFL, but their success with having a good team around them. And I think that the successful presidents we've had, whether it's Clinton or Obama, they've had really good advisors with experience. And I think both Biden and Trump, in my opinion, have been not as blessed or fortunate as Bill Clinton was, for example, when you looked at really astute leaders in the White House that had the experience. And this could be communication.
And George Bush, actually, for that matter.
What?
George Bush Jr., for that matter.
Right. And that's something we don't talk enough about. But I mean, I think Hillary Clinton could have actually been an effective president if she had been elected because of the fact that her husband had a lot of experience in putting together cabinets and transition teams and making sure that, there were even some Republicans like Robert Cohen, who I think was a Secretary of Defense under Clinton, working for the president at that time. So I think it's really important for us to understand that a success of a U.S. president a lot of times, and I just don't see that happening. I mean, and I'm going to just not really throw Biden under the bus, but Shaquille Latimer for over 6 months to a year now has been saying it's the economy, it's the economy, it's the economy. And what does President Biden do? He keeps going on television saying democracy's under attack. Well, obviously, that's a script he's being given by somebody. And if I were Biden, I would just get rid of, I'd get a new chief of staff. I get a new communications director. I might even look at getting a new national security advisor, new secretary of state, do what Clinton did when 2 years into his presidency, he got rid of everyone and put in new people. If you don't change the team, if you don't change the playbook, guess what? You're going to continue to lose. That's my analogy of the day.
I actually said that quite a while. I've been saying that quite consistently as well, that I was very concerned that Republicans were just resting on their laurels saying the economy's not doing so well, so therefore vote for us, without actually offering very much other than we're going to increase oil production. That really I thought was going to be a problem. I didn't think it would be this much of a problem. I have to say I got this one wrong. I did think that this was going to be a significant win for the Republicans. Republicans will probably take the House. Well, there's only 60 seats left. They've only got to win 18. They'll win the House. But it's not a good result, but by any stretch of the imagination. Sasha, I know we want to go to you. I just want to ask one question, then we'll go to the Ukraine. In my opinion, we're beginning to hear sort of rumors. Is Hillary Clinton going to run? Is it going to be Hillary, Trump? That sort of stuff. But let's just assume that Trump doesn't run. I assume that everybody's going to think, yep, if Trump doesn't run, it'll be DeSantis. And certainly when he won last night, the gubernatorial race, people were actually chanting 2 more years, not 4 years. So his supporters obviously would like him to run as well based on that. So let's assume that Ron DeSantis runs for the Republicans. Who actually is going, and let's assume that Biden doesn't run in 2024. Who's the next candidate? Who are the Democrats putting up? There's a lot of older Democrats that are out there that are a bit more experienced, where people are maybe a little bit tired of that. They want some fresh young people in there. Who is going to be the Democrat candidate for the people that you know of right now who would actually have a decent shot at defeating what is at the moment the superstar of the Republican Party, DeSantis? Who's the Democrat?
Kill. I mean, that's it's
Go on, stab in the dark, Steve. Stab in the dark. Take a name out of the Democratic phone book. Who do you reckon would have a good shot?
Well, I don't. I think that's an issue right now. I mean, and after this, I'm gonna want to go to Sasha, but I mean, obviously Kamala Harris is going to want to run for the nomination if Biden doesn't run. That's very clear, but I don't think she's got a good shot. Gavin Newsom from California. The other name that has continued to surface, who actually has the intellectual capability, but he was more of a liberal Democrat. He chaired Bernie Sanders' campaign. Is Ro Khanna, who is a United States congressman from Silicon Valley. Wrote an interesting book called Dignity in Tech about big tech. Stanford law professor, represents the Silicon Valley Bay Area. His name has come up as a potential. I don't know whether he'd be on the ticket or whether he would run for president, but I still don't think he has the name recognition to win a national race. Could an Indian American win? Well, yeah.
I think it'd be a very interesting scenario if we saw a Gavin Newsom DeSantis race, because Florida and California are like polar opposites in their policies.
Yeah.
They're sort of
I don't think the governor, but I think but anyway, we'll come back.
I think that'd be Lee, what's your?
I just wonder about this. We're going to Sasha, and I just saw something now. This is NBC News, a major blow to Putin. Russia orders retreat from key city in southern Ukraine in Kherson. So, Sasha, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, of course. Actually, Ukraine was following on U.S. elections because obviously the Kevin McCarthy said that there will be no more help to Ukraine if they will win the House. It all remains to be seen, because even if the Republicans control the House, they will have a very slim majority there, most likely like 200 to 220, maybe 216, something like that. I'm not so sure about my numbers, but very slim majority. And the McCarthy, it's a mouthpiece of Donald Trump. So when he says something, that he's saying to please the Trump and his base of 70 million people. So that's understandable. But it represents only a small fraction of Republicans in the House. We are talking about 25%, maybe even less. So there are still 75% of Republicans in the House that most of them definitely support Ukraine. So they should not worry about that. And actually,
can Biden, by executive order, sorry, because I'm actually a little bit outside of my depth on this one of the few times I'll admit to not understanding something about American politics and governance, if the House was held by Republicans and the Senate happened to be held by Republicans, can Biden, because it's such a slim margin there, can Biden grant aid to the Ukraine by executive order, or is he going to need to have congressional approval?
Depends. What are you see before? Although the Lend-Lease was approved a long time ago, but then there was talk that it's going to be started to be used from October 1st, which is the fiscal date of the fiscal year of United States. And what's happened? It hasn't been used yet because Biden was supplying essentially free money to Ukraine. All the billions of dollars, it was free because Lend-Lease stipulates that whatever equipment they've got after the war, they have to either send it back or they have to prove that it was destroyed or something like that. So there is some kind of accountability when you are getting free amounts of help, including weapons or so on, and you don't have to pay even a penny back. That's much better deal for Ukraine than Lend-Lease, obviously. But Lend-Lease was approved, and Biden can, if he will not be able anymore to supply free help to Ukraine, then he'll definitely go into Lend-Lease agreement, and because it was approved, there's basically no efforts for him to get the money. So concerning Ukraine, it's but again, everything will be decided there on the battlefield. It's not how much help. You see, the more help, especially in offensive weapons, Ukraine will get, the faster it will defeat Russia, and the Putin regime will be gone. He will be displaced by his own people. But the question is whether United States really wants that outcome. Obviously, for several months, all they wanted is to make sure that Russia will not be victorious in this affair. They achieved that. Now, do they want Ukraine became victorious in that affair? It's unclear. I'm not sure about the U.S. policy or so on. But I know that even without any help, Ukraine will defeat Russian forces and kick them out of Ukraine. That's very.
It raises a question about what happens if China was to, encroach on Taiwan. What is going to be the response from Western countries led by the United States? Personally, I've said this to you before, Sasha. I personally think that the response in the Ukraine from Western countries has been kind of weak. I think that NATO and I think that the allied forces like Australia, who are obviously not part of NATO, probably should have done more. I think that this shouldn't have been allowed to continue for as long as it has.
Shaquille, you're right, except one thing. If the goal of the West and United States is not to defeat Russia, but make it so weak that it will become a joke. How that could be done is to prolong the war, to exhaust them as much as possible through sanctions, through all this mobilization and other stuff. So this, I feel, for some reason, there's no evidence of any kind, but I feel that the goal of the West and particularly US is to weaken Russia and make it next to nothing.
Well, that may well be the case, and a number of Republicans have said, this is fantastic because we get to essentially have a proxy war with Russia without any American boots being on the ground.
Absolutely.
But to me, that's the height of immorality. If you want to have a fight with Russia, you go and have a fight with Russia. Don't allow innocent people in the Ukraine to have to suffer and die and be injured. Because you want to have this proxy war. That's just completely wrong. And if you look historically at where Western countries have gone in and tried to do this sort of stuff in other regions of the world, especially Africa and parts of Asia, this has ended up backfiring. It may not backfire immediately. It might be decades later where it backfires. But people have long memories, and it's just not the right way of doing things. I think that the response should have been stronger. Personally, I've always said that. I think the response should be stronger from the West. But it is what it is, and obviously I'm not in charge, so I can't do anything about it. But at the end of the day, we either have to stand for what we stand for, or just admit that we like to stand for these things. We like to say that we stand for these things, but when push comes to shove, we don't really mean it.
Well, Shaquille, you remember when the war started, all what Ukraine was getting from the West was some javelins. That's about it. And then slowly, as the war escalated, the more help was coming. Then HIMARS started to come, only 4, then 8, 16, and it keeps growing. And now there's new systems are coming against the missiles. And Russian warplanes as well. By the way, Russian warplanes are no longer flying over the Ukrainian skies because they're now being hit.
Right.
So they stopped that. So it's a very interesting thing. But of course, you're right that the Ukraine bears incredible sacrifices in human lives.
Right.
Let's go to Lee real quick let's go to Lee real quick, and then Steve, do close out. Lee, you actually avoided my question and changed the topic like a good Democrat does. That was a cheap shot. My question was, if you're muted, by the way, Lee, if Trump doesn't run, we're more than likely going to see a DeSantis run for the Republicans. Who do you think, given who's currently around, who do you think is if you're a betting man and you had to pick somebody, who would it be that would be representing the Democrats to take on DeSantis?
If you had asked me that a couple months ago, I would have said Tulsi, but obviously that's not going to be the case now. I don't see anyone.
Yeah, it's hard. They just don't have a deep bench.
Deck.
I mean,
So
this
are
is
we
a
going to
big-
settle on? Are we going to settle on Gavin Newsom? Is that the only person that's been suggested so far is Gavin Newsom? Is that we're going with?
It's going to be Kamala
Gavin
Harris.
Newsom
Kamala Harris,
versus.
Kamala Harris will win the nomination. She'll be the nominee. And
I don't
DeSantis-
think she will. I actually don't think that she'd win it personally. But okay, we'll go with that. Gavin Newsom versus DeSantis. You heard it here first. Steve Rao says Harris versus DeSantis. Steve Rao, over to you for the close.
Well, folks, it's been wonderful being with you today. We will continue to monitor this. Tomorrow, we will be talking about Veterans Day because I will be gone on Friday. We're going to be talking about veterans, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you all so much for being with us, and we congratulate Wiley Nickel for winning that big race and anyone who ran and put their name on the ballot. Thank you all so much. God bless each of you, and we look forward to seeing you all. May the light and love of our hearts always lift us out of the darkness. Thank you so much. God bless each and every one of you, and we'll see you tomorrow for our Veterans Day edition live from PBS Carolina, where we'll also be talking about the continued situation in Ukraine and around the world. God bless each of you. Talk to you soon.
Take care. God bless. Be well.